Thanks for tuning in to the second edition of The Power of Simulation in Law Enforcement Training, Results and Trends. Hello, my name is George Buck. I'm a law enforcement driving instructor at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center. In March of 2018, the FLETC's Driver and Marine Division in the Applied Research Branch completed research that explored a new blended approach to teaching the driving technique of following an ideal line of travel, also known as the line of travel. The line of travel is defined as the most efficient path to steer a vehicle and keep the platform stable when traveling through a turn. The line or path resembles a modified race line. It is commonly taught in emergency vehicle operations training, known as EVOC. The goal of utilizing the line of travel is to minimize lateral weight shifts of the vehicle during emergency responses. This concept is currently taught using a lecture block and a hands-on driving application block on an outdoor driving range. This research examined the contrast of performance outcomes between participants trained using driving simulators versus our traditional range driving. One concern with the current driving methodology is that participants may be memorizing vehicle lane positions on the practice driving range and may not be able to apply the recently obtained knowledge or concepts when driving on a new, unfamiliar roadway. While memorizing the driving course might help the student pass a specific test, it does not necessarily translate to learning the concept and principles related to the line of travel and transferring the skills to foreign roadways. This study allowed FLETC to explore and analyze the curriculum to improve driving methodologies, minimize vehicle collisions, and save lives. With me today is Dr. Rick Giovango with the Applied Research Branch, who will share with you the research results.
Thank you, George. Hello, I'm Dr. Rick Giovango, and I'm going to speak to you about the research study results. This between groups quasi-experimental study compared the performance of participants trained solely on a traditional real-world driving course to participants trained in a blended simulator and range driving environment. The training design permitted teaching psychomotor, cognitive, and perceptual skills to drivers with no formal experience of line of travel training. The design compared the validity of a 3-screen fixed-base driving simulator in contrast to real-world driving. There were 3 independent variables in the experimental design. This study used a t-test to examine differences between the driving simulator and on-road driving performance metrics. The near transfer was analyzed using a dependent t-test. Let's review the 3 research questions. Research question 1. Can participants who receive training in a blended learning environment, both simulated and live driving, perform better on the standard driving range practical examination than those trained with traditional DMD methods? Research question 2. Can the participants who received training with a blended and traditional learning environment transfer that knowledge when confronted with a new environment? Research question 3. Can participants who receive training in a blended learning environment, both simulated and live driving, gain a better understanding of the principles of line of travel on a cognitive test than those trained with traditional methods? Let's look at research question 1. Can participants who receive training in a blended learning environment, both simulated and live driving, perform better on the standard driving range practical examination than those trained with traditional methods? Range 6, practice and assessment. The mean practical evaluation score on range 6 for the blended group was 92.8, whereas the mean practical evaluation score for the traditional group was 98.1, showing a 5.34 point difference favoring traditional group. The independent samples t-test found the means differed significantly. Therefore, the traditional group performed better than the blended group in regards to performance on range 6. Research question 2. Can participants who receive training with a blended and traditional learning environment transfer that knowledge when presented with a new environment? Range 7, measuring transfer. The practical evaluation for the blended group on range 7 was 71.31, whereas the mean score for the traditional group was 71.11, showing a 0.2 difference favoring the blended group. The independent samples t-test found the mean did not differ significantly. What is noticeable is a large standard deviation for both groups in contrast to the noticeable smaller dispersion on the previous range 6 evaluation. The mean average for the practical evaluation for a traditional group on range 6 was 98.11, and the mean average for the blended group was 92.31. However, when both groups were moved to range 7, which was a new environment, their scores fell dramatically. The mean average for the traditional group on range 7 was 71.11, a 27-point drop. For the blended group, the mean average was 71.31, a 21-point drop. This driving assessment took place shortly after all participants had passed the driving assessment on range 6 with a score of 80% or above. These points show an extreme lack of near training transfer. The participants did not fully grasp the concepts of line of travel and were therefore not able to apply those concepts to a novel driving environment, range 7. Thus, passing a practical exam on range 6 does not guarantee that participants were able to transfer their knowledge to a real-world driving environment. To further look at the differences in learning between groups, traditional group had an advantage on range 6, since they had been physically driving on it for 4 hours. The blended group did not have the same advantage, which reflected in their performance on range 6. However, when driving in a new environment, loss of performance was significantly less than the blended group. The independent samples t-test 2.02. This finding suggests blended groups were more resilient to performance loss due to a new environment, meaning the blended group understood the concepts of line of travel better than the traditional group, allowing them to adjust to the new environment better than the traditional group. Research question 3. Can participants who receive training in a blended learning environment, both simulated and live driving, gain a better understanding of the principles of line of travel on a cognitive test than those trained with traditional methods? The blended group cognitive test score was 69.8, whereas the traditional group test score was 67.5, showing a 2.26 point difference favoring the blended group. It should be noted that at this juncture that the passing cut score for the Driver Marine Division practical evaluations and written exams is 80%. Time on task records were kept of all the participants. This was actually time behind the wheel of the car on the simulator on the first day of practice time. The time on task for the traditional group was 15.51 minutes of time actually behind the wheel of the car. The time on task for the blended group was 52.28 minutes of time actually in the simulator driving. This shows the blended group had over 3 times the amount of actual practice time behind the wheel compared to the traditional group. In addition, the ratio of instructors is 4-to-1 in the simulators versus 1-to-1 in the cars. There is a considerable amount of downtime in the cars due to the 1-to-1 ratio. Now I'm going to turn it back over to George Buck with the Driver Marine Division, who will take a closer look at these findings.
Thanks, Rick. The definitive goal of training is to improve the skills, knowledge, and abilities of the individual driver, which should lead to increased work performance. The study findings show that driving simulators are valid teaching platforms. The lack of training transfer, however, shows deficiencies exist somewhere in the training process. The current course's instructional design should be reviewed to improve individual understanding and subsequent application of the material. What factors influence the transfer of training? Researchers have generally viewed transfer as being affected by a plethora of influences. Much of the literature suggests practice variability is a way to enhance training transfer. Variety and concepts are the key to the student driver. The different scenarios and experiences allow the brain to prioritize and organize information, which allows the adult learner, over time, to transfer information from the memorization stage to the learning stage. The participants did not fully understand the concepts of line of travel, and therefore were not able to transfer their knowledge when confronted with a new course. Line of travel is an advanced racing technique. More time should be spent explaining and showing the participants the concepts in different venues that may enhance their understanding. It is believed that realistic training will lead to better transfer of training due to the similarity of the environment. But familiarity alone may not be enough. Publication Norman, Dorr, and Grierson, published in 2012, point to two reasons for that. First, just knowing how to drive does not ensure you may understand the concepts of line of travel. Second, cognitive load theory establishes that additions to the learning task may detract from learning due to our limited ability to process incoming information without varied practice time. The mind seeks the simplest path by memorizing the course, especially if it does not truly understand the concepts. These findings suggest that the blended group was more resilient to performance loss in a new environment. This could be attributed to the after-action review, overlays, and more time on task that the blended group received in the simulators that the traditional group did not receive. I hope this presentation has helped you understand a little more about the power of simulations in law enforcement training. I'm George Buck, and this has been FLETC Talks.